I look at my hands now, spotted and trembling with an age that feels like a punishment, and I wonder if they are the same hands that held the Lee Enfield in the Devil's Gardens. Memory is a tricky thing, isn't it? It's like a gearbox with a stripped cog. Sometimes it engages, smooth and terrible, and other times it just grinds against the silence. But I remember the oil. I remember the smell of it. Not the thick black sludge we used on the floor of the Austin Motor Company works in Longbridge, but the thin, sharp scent of military-grade lubricant baking on hot steel. It must have been late October. The desert didn't have seasons, just moods, angry and furnace-hot, or cold and indifferent. I was sitting in the lee of a burnt-out truck, the metal groaning as it cooled in the twilight, trying to clean the sand out of the bolt action. That sand, it wasn't like the sand at the seaside. It was a powder, fine as flour and sharp as glass. It got into everything, between your teeth, into the creases of your eyelids, into the threading of a screw. Back in Birmingham, before the world went mad, I understood dirt. Grease under the fingernails was a badge of honor. It meant you'd built something. I was a fitter, see. I understood how things worked. A piston goes up, a valve opens, fuel ignites, power flows. There was a logic to it, a rhythm. The factory floor was a symphony of clatter and hiss, but it was organized. Every man had a job. Every bolt had a home. If a machine broke, you stripped it down, found the fault, and made it right. You created order out of chaos. But out there in that vast, empty expanse of North Africa, the logic dissolved. I was trying to apply the rules of the assembly line to a world that was intent on tearing itself apart. I ran a rag over the firing pin, my thumb tracing the cold metal. It felt alien. In the factory, a tool was an extension of your arm, a creator. This rifle, it was a tool, yes, but its only product was silence. I paused, the rag hovering over the chamber. The wind was picking up. That was the fear. Not the Germans. Not really. You could see a German. You could calculate the windage, adjust for the drop, and deal with him. But the wind brought the dust. I closed my eyes for a second, and suddenly I wasn't in the desert anymore. I was back on the factory floor, the night the sirens wailed. The roof had come down, not with a crash, but with a deep, chest-rattling thud that sucked the air right out of the room. Then came the dust. Brick dust, plaster, pulverized concrete. It filled my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. I was blind, choking in the dark. My hands scrabbling against debris that used to be a lathe. My hand jerked. The firing pin slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the receiver. A tiny sound, but in the vast silence of the waiting desert, it sounded like a church bell. I stared at my fingers. They were shaking. Just a tremor, a vibration like a flywheel slightly off balance. I clenched my fist, forcing the muscles to submit. A sniper cannot shake. A sniper is a precision instrument. That's what they told us. But I was just Jack Miller, a factory rat who knew how to tighten a nut, pretending to be a killer. The wind hissed over the dunes, carrying that fine grit. It stung my cheek. I felt the panic rising in my chest, that same suffocating tightness from the blitz. If the storm came, I'd be blind again, helpless, a component disconnected from the machine, useless and discarded. I hurriedly reassembled the bolt, my movements jerky, desperate to have the rifle whole again. As if a working gun could hold back the wind. The silence of the desert was heavy, pressurized. It was the silence of a held breath. I wiped the sweat from my eyes, leaving a streak of oil across my forehead. I was 23 years old, but I felt ancient. I felt like I was waiting for the foreman to come and tell me I'd ruined the batch, that I was fired, that I was no good. Then the whistle cut the air. It wasn't a melodious sound. It was a shriek, sharp and violent. "Miller, on your feet. We're moving on Alamein." The sergeant's voice was gravel and gin, cutting through my internal fog. The waiting was done. The machine was starting up. I grabbed the rifle, the wood warm against my palm, and stood. The fear didn't leave, but it changed. It shifted from the paralyzed dread of the unknown into the cold, hard knot of duty. I checked the action one last time. Smooth, ready. We moved out as the sun began to dip, a long, Ragged line of men trudging towards the horizon, where the sky was bruising purple. The transition from the ordinary world of waiting to the threshold of hell wasn't a step. It was a slide. One moment we were walking, the only sound the crunch of boots and the clinking of webbing, and then the world ended. It started with a flicker on the horizon, like summer lightning, but relentless. Then the sound arrived. It wasn't a noise you heard. It was a noise you felt in the hollow of your stomach. The artillery barrage. 1,000 guns speaking at once. The ground beneath my boots trembled, a constant, low-frequency vibration that traveled up through my legs and settled in my teeth. The sky tore open. The darkness was banished by flashes of orange and yellow. Violent strokes of light that revealed the terrified faces of the men next to me in strobe light shutter clicks. This was the threshold. We were walking into the furnace. My mind, desperate for purchase, retreated to what it knew. I stopped looking at the war as a battle and started seeing it as a catastrophic engine failure. The artillery was the piston slap. The tracer fire arching overhead was the spark. We were the fuel. Keep spacing. Don't bunch up, the orders were shouted, but they sounded distant, muffled by the sheer volume of the chaos. I focused on the man in front of me, watching his pack bounce. Left foot, right foot, procedure. We hit the first line of resistance in the dark. It wasn't a grand charge. It was confusion. Men shouting, shadows moving in the smoke. The air filled with the acrid stench of cordite, a smell so much sharper than the sulfur of the foundry. It tasted like copper penny on the tongue. To my left, a Bren gun opened up, a stuttering, rhythmic chugging that I found strangely comforting. It sounded like a heavy riveter. Then it stopped. Not the stop of a trigger released, but the abrupt, choking halt of a jam. Stoppage. Damn it, stoppage. I looked over. It was Smithy. He was hammering on the magazine with the heel of his hand, panic wide in his eyes. Tracers were whipping past us, angry hornets of light. We were exposed. The logic of the battlefield was simple. If you don't fire back, you die. I didn't think. I didn't make a conscious decision to be a hero. I just saw a broken machine. I slid into the crater beside him. Give it here, I yelled, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. It seized, Jack. The bloody thing seized. I shoved him aside, my hands taking over. The barrel was hot, searing the skin of my palms, but I didn't feel the pain. I felt the mechanism, the gas regulator. I could see the schematic in my head, floating over the dirt and the blood. The sand had got in. The tolerance was too tight. I pulled a multi-tool from my webbing, something I'd filed down myself from a spanner back in Birmingham. It wasn't regulation, but it fit. I popped the pin, stripped the receiver cover. There, a grit-fused stoppage in the slide. The air around us was being chewed up. Dirt kicked up into my face as bullets impacted the lip of the crater. Smithy was curled in a ball, hands over his helmet. But I was calm. This was just a jammed feed on the number 4 lathe. Clear the obstruction. Realign. Reset. I scraped the grit out with the tip of the tool, poured a precious capful of oil from my bottle into the action, and slammed the mechanism back together. The metal clicked, a satisfying, solid sound of engagement. Feed, I shouted, slapping the gun back into Smithy's hands. He looked at me bewildered, then pulled the trigger. The Bren roared back to life, spitting fire into the dark. He looked back at me, a grin breaking through the grime on his face. "You mad bastard, Jack," he screamed. I nodded, wiping the grease on my trousers. I had passed the test. I wasn't just a farmer with a rifle or a clerk with a grenade. I was a mechanic of war. I could keep the machine running. We pushed forward, the adrenaline souring in my gut. The landscape was a nightmare of wire and mines. Bodies lay in the sand, looking like discarded bundles of rags. I tried not to look at them. If I looked, they became people. If I didn't look, they were just debris, broken parts. We reached a ridge, the sand cooling rapidly as the night deepened. But the air was still hot with explosives. We were penned. The advance halted. A sound tore through the cacophony, a noise so fast it sounded like canvas ripping. Get down, we hit the dirt. The air above us disintegrated. It was a Spandau, an MG42, the engineering marvel of the German army. It fired so fast you couldn't count the rounds. It was a chainsaw of lead. I pressed my face into the sand, the vibration of the impacts shaking my skull. This wasn't a jam. This was a machine working perfectly, designed to kill us. The sergeant crawled over, his face a mask of blood and dust. He grabbed my shoulder, his grip like a vice. He pointed into the darkness, towards a flicker of muzzle flash in the ruins of a blockhouse about 300 yards out. "Miller," he screamed, his voice cracking over the roar of the gun. "That gun is tearing us apart. Take it out." Now I didn't answer the sergeant. I didn't salute. I just rolled to the right, sliding into the depression of a dried-out wadi, and began the crawl. Belly to the earth, elbows digging into the shale. I became a reptile, moving through the dead ground while the Spandau chewed up the ridge line above me. The rounds snapped overhead like angry hornets, searching for flesh. But I was low. I had to flank him. I had to find the angle where the shield didn't cover him. Then the world turned brown. It wasn't smoke. It was the wind. It rose up out of nowhere. A wall of stinging grit that swallowed the moon and the stars. Visibility dropped to 0. I froze. The sand filled my nose, my mouth, my ears. I couldn't breathe. The darkness pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Suddenly, I wasn't in the desert. I was back on the floor of the factory in Birmingham. The air raid siren was wailing. The roof had just come down, and the air was thick with pulverized brick and plaster. I was trapped under the lathe. I was choking on the dust of my own livelihood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. The voice in my head screamed. I drove my fingers into the sand, grounding myself. I felt the heat of the earth. This wasn't the factory. I wasn't a boy buried in rubble. I was a hunter. I forced a breath through clenched teeth, filtering the grit. I waited. The wind howled, a banshee screaming for blood, and then, as quickly as it had arrived, it shifted. The curtain lifted. I was 60 yards closer. The blockhouse was right there, a jagged tooth of concrete against the night sky. I brought the Lee Enfield up. The wood of the stock was warm against my cheek. I settled the butt into my shoulder. My eye found the scope. The world narrowed down to a circle of crosshairs. There was no muzzle flash. The gun had stopped. I adjusted the focus. The lens cleared. I saw the gunner. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a faceless stormtrooper. He was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 18. His helmet was askew, sliding over his eyes, and he was panicked. He was wrestling with the feed cover of the MG42. I saw his hands, grease-stained, knuckles white, fingernails black with oil. He was yanking at the belt, trying to clear a jam. Time stretched. It slowed down until every second was an hour. I watched him. I knew exactly what he was doing. I could feel the resistance of the metal in my own fingertips. A double feed, or maybe a burr on the extractor. He was trying to pry it loose. He was just a mechanic, trying to make his machine work, just like me. I saw the frustration on his face, the way he bit his lip, the way he looked at the mechanism with that singular, desperate focus of a man whose tools have failed him. For a heartbeat, I wasn't a soldier. I was a factory worker watching an apprentice struggle with a lathe. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to tell him to ease the tension, to shim the bolt. Then he looked up. His eyes swept the darkness. He didn't see me, but he was looking for me. He was looking for the targets. He was looking for Smithy. He was looking for the sergeant. If he fixed that jam, if he got that belt seated, the saw would start up again, and my friends would be meat. He was a mechanic, but I was a sniper. I exhaled. The air left my lungs in a long, steady stream. The crosshairs settled on the space between his helmet and his collar. He looked back down at the gun, his hand raising to strike the charging handle, to force the mechanism into battery. I couldn't let him fix it. The rifle bucked against my shoulder. A single, sharp punch. There was no scream. The boy simply folded. He collapsed over the receiver of the machine gun, his head coming to rest on the very metal he had been trying to repair. The blockage was permanent now. "Move up. Go, go," the shout came from behind me. The spell broke. The platoon surged forward, bayonets fixed, charging the silenced position. I worked the bolt of my rifle up, back, forward, down. The brass casing ejected into the sand. Smoking, I stood up. My knees felt like water. I walked to the blockhouse. I had to see. The boys were already there, securing the perimeter, checking for other hostiles. I walked up to the gun pit. He was draped over the weapon like a rag doll. I looked at his hands. They were still resting on the feed tray, still trying to fix the jam. Even in death, I looked at the machine. It was a beautiful piece of engineering. Stamped steel, air-cooled, efficient, and now useless. I had stopped the machine by breaking the operator. I felt a sickness rise in my gut, heavier than the fear, heavier than the grief. It was a cold, hard stone settling in my stomach. I turned away. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I checked my own rifle, wiping a speck of dust from the bolt head. That was 40 years ago. I'm in my shed now. The smell of oil and sawdust is the same here as it was in the factory, as it was in the desert. I have a radio on in the corner, playing soft music. On the bench in front of me is a toaster. The heating element is gone. A simple fix. I pick up the pliers. My hands are spotted with age now, the knuckles swollen with arthritis. But they still know the work. They still know how to make things function. But sometimes when the light hits the metal just right, or when a sudden draft kicks up the dust from the floorboards, I'm back there. I see the boy. I see the grease on his fingers. They tell you war is about glory. They tell you it's about courage. They don't tell you about the affinity you feel for the man you kill. They don't tell you that you'll see yourself in the crosshairs. In the factory, you fix a machine so it can build something. In war, you fix a problem by breaking the man who runs the machine. I came home. I built a life, but I never forgot the price. That boy, he was the price. The real war isn't what they do to you. It's what they make you do to others. I put the pliers down. My hand is shaking. I can't steady it. The toaster remains open, wires exposed. I can't finish the job. The machine is broken, and I don't have the heart to make it run again. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.